G'day, Chris Walker here, and this is nature's law number 3, the law of conservation, or interconnectedness as I call it. And underpinning this law is the premise that nothing's missing, just changes in form. And it's underpinned also by the law of balance and the law of growth. And so really, when we start talking about mind mapping and ideas and thoughts and how they create or can uncreate our reality, this is really important stuff, because delusion is really easy to buy into and think it's something else. So without further ado, let's just jump into it and see how we go. We're born pretty well at some stage in our life. We don't have a story. At that point in our life, we're a kid. We don't have a story. We don't have a past. We don't have a future. All we do is we are we. And there's no story to be had. And I think sometimes this is called the human spirit. If you sit with yourself in a chair and become totally present, your story goes away, because there's no past and future, and you become this, let's say, this perfect presence, this innocence, this powerful spirit that's inside of us all. But it must escape story. So to find that place, we need to be absent from time, not know what time it is, and not worry about the time, past or future in particular, and space. They're the two variables that create a sense of story. So if there's no space, there's no time, and we don't put energy into all that, we are present. Then when we're present, there is no story, and we're back in this original self. What happens very quickly from that childhood is we create good Pete and bad Pete. Now, the good Pete gets approval, and the bad Pete gets disapproval. And the irony of this is that the behaviors that Pete calls good or likes in himself in this example, and the behaviors that he calls bad and doesn't like in himself, can change all over the world. There's no common paradigm. The religions try to tell us that there's a good Pete and a bad Pete, and we're likable for one and we're unlikable for the other. But if you look around what goes on in brothers, or twins in a family, one twin will behave, be naughty, and the other one will be good in order to get attention. So actually, although we've got values imposed on us from society and from corporate cultures and what have you to tell us what is good Pete and bad Pete, we work this stuff out for ourselves, and this starts to develop in us what's called a value set. We start to like the things that reinforce the things that make us feel good, and we start to dislike the things that make us feel bad. So we automatically start to develop intrinsic values and intrinsic sets of belief patterns into good Pete and bad Pete. But my goodness me, it gets more complicated. As time goes on, good Pete and bad Pete exist, and they start to grow. But what makes it worse is good Pete and bad Pete start to get a history, and they start to get a future. So good Pete is not only good Pete in the present moment, and there's a bad Pete in the present moment. He starts to remember himself, how he was last week or last month and last year, and he starts to get a position on his memory. Was I good? Was I better before than I am now, or was I worse before than I am now? Have I improved? Was the past better, and was it worse? Is the future am I going to be a better person in the future or a worse person in the future? So Pete starts to develop story, not only based on historical events, but story based on projection into the future. So Pete becomes quite complicated, because he's got a public persona which he puts on the face and says, here's me, here's public Pete, and here's all the things I like about myself, and here's private Pete, the Pete that I don't like and I'm trying to get rid of, or trying to yoga out of my life, or discipline away. And so Pete becomes quite complicated. And whatever comes Pete's way to tell him that the story he's created about the past, the story he's creating about the future, or the story he's creating about the present, anything that comes his way that reinforces his story, Pete calls good. And anything that comes his way that contradicts his story, Pete calls bad. And that's called happy and sad. Now, this becomes what underpins people's emotional choices. And it's how we move forward and how we make choices in life. And it's very, very unwise. It's very unwise. And I want to try and show you how in the next couple of slides. So let's keep moving through here. The fact of the matter is, in the past and the present and the future, there was good and there was bad. So actually, any story about the past that says there was more good than bad or bad than good is not true. And any story about the future that we create in a vision quest or a vision for the future that says there's going to be good things happen without bad or bad things happen without good isn't true. The laws of nature determine that whether we're in this very second in time right now, right in this moment, sitting here right now, in this moment, there is good and bad happening. We're having pleasure and we're having pain. Now, a lot of people argue, oh no, it doesn't feel like that. I'm, having great relationship with this person and it feels like pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Well, there is pain right in this very second. There's pain of aging, there's pain of anxieties, there's pain of distraction from purpose, there's pain of loss of money, there's pain. But we don't account for those pains because we value the emotions so much that we say, if the emotion tells us I feel good, I do feel good. If the emotion tells us I feel bad, I do feel bad. Now, these are great because what happens is if we empower emotion to say, this is what it feels like to feel good, we have no choice but to empower the same emotion when it flips the other way and emotional stuff comes to disturb our life. So a lot of people who are going through personal trauma have empowered the emotion to feel good about themselves. They've said, if these things happen, I feel good. And they've automatically registered on the register book to say, if something contradictory to all what I want happens, I must, in contrast, feel bad. And this actually can drive people to suicide. It can drive them into depression. It can drive them into murder because they get so attached to the pleasure of something. They have to be attached when there's pain of something. And the pain of it is actually driving them mad, and the pleasure of it almost drove them out of their mind as well. So to understand this model that there is a balance of positive and negative in the past, positive and negative in the future, and positive negative in the present really brings you into a space where you can become what I call inspired. It means you have a higher purpose. Your purpose is higher than your emotion, your lower mind. You're driven by things that will create things in the long term that you want, not driven by emotions and driven by feelings and senses, which will create short-term satisfaction and long-term dissatisfaction. Let's have a quick look at some possibilities here. Depression is when a person elates the past and says the past is bloody fantastic, but they look to the future and the future is really awful. This is a really common thing that the person says, although this diagram is showing the past as balanced, they will say the past was absolutely fantastic. I've got a picture of how it used to be. It was damn good. And I've got a picture of the future. It's really damn bad. And that is the essence of depression. Now, of course, following the model of nature, all we do with depression is instead of saying the future is bad, we don't say it's good. We say the future is bad and good. And we actually introduced the idea that there were pain and pleasure in the past, that the pains, that the pleasure they're attaching to in the past, or the model they're running of the past, is invalid, that there is actually a balance of pleasure and pain in the past, a balance of pleasure and pain in the future, and the person doesn't go to the opposite to depression, which is elation. The person goes to a place of neutrality, which is, in more common language, the present moment, and end of depression. Now, this can happen relatively fast, or if the person super has spent a lot of time attaching to the past and there is a lot of past memory and they've blocked emotion and a lot blocked feeling about it, it can take a little while. It can take a week or two, but it's not hard to work through the whole depression cycle just by going through what's happened in the past, get the reality of it, what's happened in the future, and get the reality of it. One thing that makes it really hard to work with depression, and the form that I've got really helps to explore that, is that people will look at the past in terms of their values, and they'll say, in terms of my dominant value, i.e. making money. I made money, a lot of money in the past, and they'll say, therefore, the past is better than the future because I'm not making money in the future. But there are 7 areas of life, and there are other values other than making money. There's relationship, there's social, health, career, financial, spiritual, and health. And so what we need to do is make sure that what someone might do, they might discount the other 6 areas of life and say, all I remember is being fantastic in that area of life in the past, and then quickly run a script that starts to make it sound like that was the whole past. Because they were making money in the past, the whole past was good. Because they forget that there were pains, there were the flu, their body was decaying, their relationship wasn't working as great, and they'll start to inflate their highest value in the past and deflate their highest value into the future. And this is a really simple, but it's a very powerful method of getting back on track. Another thing that we quite often have to deal with is when people get infatuated about the future, when they do a vision and they do their goals and they go and attend one of these motivational seminars. What it looks like is the past was crap, and if they do X, Y, Z, the future is going to be absolutely positive, fantastic. Now again, this is setting that person up for a lot of delusion, and they head off on tangents. They might manifest things like they might build a business, but if they actually head off in the direction of an illusion, what they will do is they'll run away from struggle. They're heading in the future looking for a fantasy, looking for pleasure-only paradigm. That means when they become an employee, they won't take criticism. When they become a partner, they don't like negativity. When they become in sport, they don't like losing, and that person becomes like a fantasy flyer. They're only looking for things that reinforce their illusion of I'm better than who I think I am, or the world is fantastic. They'll fight for peace in the world. They'll fight for whales, and it becomes like this world where they're trying to get rid of the negatives. And in nature, it's impossible. We are in a continuum. We are learning lessons of love. We are supported and challenged at every moment. We're just sometimes blindsided to the challenge and infatuated with support. The same goes for that person. They'll say something happened to the past that's really bad, and I never want to have that happen again. And what I need to do is take them, and this form will take them into the past and say what was good and bad about the past, so they stop resenting the past and infatuating the future, and they get to a more balanced, and they turn up where? In the present moment. So that's simply what we do when it comes to the infatuation of the reducing infatuation of the future and getting a real vision of the future that doesn't cause catastrophe. So there's another paradigm that we go from the laws of nature, and it's still about this nothing's missing, just changes in form, and it's grief, loss, and suffering. And this is very common, and we have to deal with it at work. People lose relationships, they lose family members, they lose something, money, whatever it is. And the paradigm looks like this. Fred here, he has something. Let's say a relationship or $100,000 or a house or a car, and it's gone. Or a relative, and it's gone. So Fred will say, I have a loss and I have a suffering. And that will send Fred into a sense of a loss without a gain, or a gain without a loss. So Fred has gone into, there is a vacuum in my life. Now, nature abhors a vacuum. There can't be a vacuum in nature. What happens in nature is things transform. So in fact, Fred still has what he had. It's just in a different form. So he might lose $100,000, but what he's got now is the potentiality to make more, or the lessons he learnt from losing that $100,000, which is $100,000 worth of education, to make more money. Or he might lose a partner, and you go, well, what was it about that partner you loved? And you can list down all the elements of that individual that you think you've lost, and you'll find that nature provided them instantaneously in other people around you or in yourself. So we have this concept of a gain or a loss, that a loss or a gain can happen without corresponding balance. But in nature, things don't get lost. Nature abhors a vacuum. Things get transformed and change shape. And the transformation is to our benefit at the end of the day, but it feels bloody awful until we discover the validity of it. So if we go through a relationship breakup, we think, oh my God, I've lost that person. Oh. And then about 2 years later, we go, thank God I lost that person, because look what I've created out of that loss. And we're thankful for it. Well, wisdom is the instantaneous recognition that crisis is a blessing. And it doesn't have to take 2 years to realize and to let go of somebody and be grieving for 2 years that somebody's gone. We can do it instantaneously. And that's a powerful process. And there's a form for that in this on this day. Jealousy, envy, and resentment. Now, this is a really important thing to deal with, because, especially for blokes, because blokes don't realize they're carrying emotions, and what they do is they develop this sort of barrier, and they feel it inside, but they don't do anything. How often do you see a woman cry? Most women cry once every week or two about something. They have very close contact with that sensory experience of feeling things, and whereas guys will just store it up and grit their teeth and start acting stupid. And one of the things that drives men to act really stupid that I've observed throughout the world is jealousy, grief, and jealousy, envy, and resentment. They start to feel bigger than or smaller than other people in the world. And there's nothing, we're no better or worse than anybody else. But the ego, Fred and ego, he can think that somebody else comes into his office and that they're more important than him. Or he might think that somebody else is dating his girlfriend and they're better than him. So then what he might do is start to shrink. And he feels small relative to someone. And when a person feels small, they start doing stupid things. They start doing things to inflate themselves. They start doing things to try and hurt others. They try and when we feel small relative to someone, we feel diminished, and then we try and live their values in order to compete, which is pretty ridiculous, because once we start working on someone else's values, we've lost ourselves. We've lost our sense of authenticity, we've lost our sense of priorities, and we've lost our personal power. Another thing that can happen is with jealousy, envy, and resentment is we start diminishing others. In order to stay big, and if other people intimidate us, we can actually start to find fault in them, to diminish them, to try and make ourselves feel superior and bigger, which of course pumps us up and sets us up for failure, because there is really nothing missing. We all have every trait. Every human being has every quality, and to be bigger than someone or better than someone is just to aggress them. And eventually, if we build ourselves up, somebody is going to come along and put us down. And being put down means losing money, losing relationship, losing health, losing whatever. So it's a very unwise strategy. It's better to recognize that nothing's missing, just changes form. What they have, you have in a different form. Last one is motivation and loyalty. So you want the guy on the left, you want him to do something, or her to do something for you. So the question is, how are you going to get that person to be motivated and loyal in the process of doing it? Because motivation's easy, dangle a carrot. But how do you get them to be motivated, loyal, and committed to doing what they do? Well, here it is. You want an action, and that action is of mutual benefit. If they do what you want, you'll give them something. If they do what you want, you'll get something. So there's an exchange taking place. So the question is, how does that action fit into their values? If a person can't link doing something to their core values, they won't do it. So we can be internally motivated to about three values we have in our life. Our three top values we're internally motivated to do, because if we can link those, whatever we do, to those three values, we're on priority, we're on purpose, we're feeling great. So the question we have is, how do we turn our values into a statement that creates a link between another person's values and the action? In other words, if I'm asked somebody to, could you please paint the fence, and their values are not making money, and I say, here's $50, which are my values, so I'll give you $50 to paint my fence, but their values are not money, they will not paint my fence very enthusiastically. However, if I find out that their values are caring for sick children in hospital, I can actually say, you know what, if you paint the fence, I'll set up a fund and I'll donate $50 a week to that hospital. How would that work? And they'll paint your fence quite enthusiastically. You don't need to motivate them, and they'll do a damn good job. So the question we're always talking about in leadership and business and relationship is, how do I communicate to another person in terms of their values, not mine? So it goes like this. I take my values and talk about the action in language of their values. So what I'm trying to do is listen to their visions and their inspirations and their purpose. As long as a person knows those three things, translates them into their values, they can be a self-motivated and a very loyal person. That's why a vision, inspiration, and purpose program within an organization is critical. We've got to know our visions, inspiration, purpose, because then how in the heck do we know what action will be related to those three priorities? How do we know what values we need to apply to get what we want? So there's the model of how to get motivation, loyalty, and commitment from people. Help them know their visions, inspiration, purpose. Make sure you know your visions, inspiration, and purpose. Know your values, know their values, and communicate to them in the action that you want in terms of their value set. This is Chris Walker. Have a great day. Bye for now.